President Obama is asking Congress not to approve new sanctions against Iran in the middle of negotiations over its nuclear program.
If we're serious about pursuing diplomacy, then there's no need for us to add new sanctions on top of the sanctions that are already very effective and that brought them to the table in the first place. Now, if it turns out they can't deliver, they can't come to the table in a serious way and get this issue resolved, the sanctions can be ramped back up, and we've got that option.
Last week, the U.S. and its partners came close to a deal with Iran. Talks resume next week. United Nations Ambassador Samantha Power is heavily involved in those negotiations. Ambassador, good morning.
Morning.
So the White House has made the point all along. These sanctions have brought Iran to the table. Why not continue to tighten the screws?
We have to test this regime. I mean, there is so much mistrust, of course, that we bring to these negotiations after generations of suspicion, and that cuts both ways. With the temporary, modest, reversible, limited relief that we are promising here, in return, we freeze the program, they dilute some of the highly enriched uranium, and we get a much more aggressive inspection and verification regime. To think that we could go from 0 to 60 overnight and come to Congress with a comprehensive deal that any of us would trust, having not probed it in this way, I think is not realistic.
Have the Israeli protest and the warnings of Prime Minister Netanyahu made these negotiations more difficult?
Well, first let me say, you know, the sign that this is not a good deal for Iran is the fact that they haven't taken the deal that's on the table right now. Israel has been a great partner with us throughout this process, and obviously our goals are identical, which is to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. We're going to continue to consult closely with them, and when the talks resume, you know, we're hopeful that we can get, again, an interim arrangement that does a lot more good and gives us much more, could give us more confidence at the end of 6 months. That we
you have said you have to test this new regime and see what their intent is. Do you have reason to believe and to know that they're not taking advantage over the time element and using it to increase?
Well, that is a very, very legitimate concern, and that's why freezing the program, we were concerned that if we didn't do an interim deal, they'd be taking advantage of the length of the negotiation. So again, the important feature of this is much more aggressive verification and inspection. And the IAEA report that we got yesterday, which we're still reviewing, shows that actually since Rouhani came to power, the program has been frozen, at least from the IAEA perspective.
Let's turn now to the UN Disability Treaty, because I know that's something you're very passionate about. Why has the U.S. failed to join that?
Well, we are hopeful that that will no longer be the case in a couple months. It's back up before the Senate. Last year, Senator Dole went door to door, actually was sending notes from Walter Reed Hospital to try to get the Senate to sign on to it. And I think partly it came up during the lame duck of the Congress, and there was some skepticism that that was a good time to do a treaty. Partly, I think there was a lot of misinformation out there about what the treaty would do. What it would do is extend the rights that persons with disabilities at home enjoy, so that when they travel, work, and live abroad, those rights would extend to them. It puts us party to a treaty that we then can use with other countries to get them to up their game. Right now, it's no secret that we're the gold standard on disability rights in this country, which matters for our wounded warriors and, again, for other Americans with disabilities, but other countries don't have the same protections in place. So this would empower us to push this agenda.
A question about Syria. Is it the view of the United States that the Syrians are complying with the understanding, and this may lead to serious negotiations between the Assad regime and the rebels under the joint jurisdiction of the Russians and the Americans?
By understanding, you mean on chemical weapons?
Yes.
Yes. On chemical weapons, we've made very significant progress in the first phase. It's early days.
So they are meeting the terms that were agreed on?
They have declared their sites, begun to destroy. It's early days.
Not hiding sites.
Begun to destroy the delivery systems for chemical weapons. And now we're moving into the most challenging phase, which is the destruction of the CW, either in Syria or moving it out of the country, which I think is our preference for much of the material.
In the midst of a civil war.
In the midst of a blazing inferno. And hats off to the UN and OPCW for putting their people in harm's way to try to conduct this mission. On the political, things are not as promising. We are seeking, though, to bring the parties together as soon as we can. The opposition has sent some encouraging signs in the last few days. But what is needed, of course, is a transitional governing body that is agreed upon by mutual consent. Parties are still pretty far apart, but again, we and the Russians to the regime are trying to do on the political side what we did on chemical weapons.
Our position is that Assad cannot stay.
Oh, yes, that's our position. Not after you gas 1,000 people.
Ambassador Samantha Power, good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora.